You know, years ago when I got into Zentangle, I had already been drawing for decades in other forms of art, but there was something really special about the Zentangle method, at least for me, that caught my eye and my attention. It was the fact that you could draw something that was actually attractive to look at, fun to draw, but it didn't require any planning. You didn't have to be a master of this or that technique. You didn't have to understand color theory. You didn't have to know proper light sourcing. You didn't have to understand anatomy. You could just draw shapes and patterns. You didn't even have to understand composition. Now, obviously, a good versus a bad composition, the good one will likely look better. But even without any sort of awareness about compositions or any of these other details, you could still draw art. And it was relaxing, it was fun, it was rewarding. But over the years, we get more and more caught up into perfecting some detail, creating elaborate compositions involving color. And none of that is wrong, none of that is bad. And it's sort of a natural progression, I guess, and we can certainly be glad to expand on our art, to improve it, to make it better than it was. But I have to admit, I really miss those early days, those first few years of Zentangle when it was just about learning patterns, duplicating them in interesting ways, and just dividing up a sheet of paper or a tile and filling each area with a given tangle. Adding a little shading for that 3D effect when it sort of comes to life, but that was it. Well, today I'm going to return, at least momentarily, to that early pleasure that I had with Zentangle. I've just randomly picked a single tangle pattern. Today I'm going to use Dragonaire, and I'm going to just draw whatever comes out of my pen, so to speak. Obviously, there'll be past experience and understanding plugged in there somehow, but I'm not going to think about it or worry about it or pre-plan it. I hope that you enjoy watching, but better yet, I hope that you'll draw along with me and experience some of that artistic freedom yourself. Let's jump right in. So I've got my tile, and like I said, we're going to be doing Dragonaire, which there's a couple different ways that it can be drawn where the shape works inwardly, where the essence of the shape moves toward the center of the tangle, or where it moves outward. So we're going to do at least one of each. So I'm going to start here with a nice big old line, sort of that lazy S or wavy shape. I'm going to tether that, and I'm going to create an aura that follows along. And now I'm going to do this one as an outward form of Dragonaire. So along each side, I'm going to make these little, they're really like little fescue shapes. Another very common form of line work that is done in Zentangle. And we just so happen to have it as part of this tangle pattern. And I'm just bringing these shapes together along the side, roughly spaced evenly as we go, but I'm not worried about that fact. And I am making them a little shorter as I get down toward this end, just to provide some variety to the shape of this pattern overall. I think I'll kind of leave it about like that. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, or similar thing. And I will use the same spacing here just so I can obey the basics of this pattern, at least, of this tangle. It can be modified, and you can create tangulations of it ad nauseum, actually, and that's completely fine, but I'm sticking with the basics. I'll create my variances as I embellish the tangle. All right, now once we have that sort of skeletal framework laid out there, what we want to do is draw from the top here on the outer edge of this pattern. I'm going to connect it down like this, and I'll do that on both sides. And then from here, we're going to come from up inside, and we're going to go out like this. We're going to create an overlapping sort of shape by repeating that as we go down through this tangle here. It almost creates like a little centipede or bug looking shape. Some sort of, my science fiction penchant here on the Tangles and Tunes channel is I love science fiction. I love drawing creatures and aliens and all kinds of strange things. So this perhaps just in my mind makes me think that way, but that is how this pattern is drawn. So hope that you are seeing the essence of that. And now what else I'm going to do, I'm going to add, as I embellish this particular tangle, I think I'm going to add some heavy bands of what we might call like a sort of like a bunzo shape. I'm going to add some heavy bands to each of these pieces. Looks like maybe I could comfortably fit 2 little bands in there. And I'm going to be careful to curve them so that they give a further impression of having a shape to these little pieces. They're not just a flat piece laying there, but they have a curvature to them, some sense of dimension and depth. Now as I draw these bands, I'm going to then ink them with a little gap, as we've done in other tangles, toward the center, or what might be understood as the highest point of that rounded shape. It'll give the visual impression of having a reflection there on the top of that shape, and again help to enhance our sense of form. And those are just fun ways to make the drawing more interesting. Being worried about form and shape and all that is not a critical factor, but since we're drawing these easy shapes step at a time, it's just fun to make them into something more interesting to look at, right? I'm just creating what I call a ragged or a jagged end there, but it gets a little filled in. But you just want an imperfect ending so that it looks more like a reflection and less like you just colored in a line there. So I'm trying to follow that general curvature. I just want to add a couple bands to each one if I can. If there's not enough room on one of them, we'll have to make an adjustment. But if I don't keep them too thick or too wide, we should be okay. And this takes a few moments, but that's part of the enjoyment that I was talking about a few minutes ago. When I first discovered Zentangle, it was a type of drawing that could be as short or as long as I needed it to be or was able to make it given my circumstance or situation at the moment, but it wasn't about hurrying, rushing to the end of the drawing. It was just about the process. Drawing lines, making shapes, and just seeing where things end up. Having a little bit of what many artists call the Zen flow, where you just stop thinking about other things. You're just focused on the patterns that you're creating, and you just revel in that time. And if you find other thoughts are intervening and interrupting your process, your flow, then maybe it's time to take a break and go deal with those other things. Or maybe it's time to learn that self-discipline and to allow yourself to enjoy some time uninterrupted by other things. other cares of life. As I look at this one, I think I'm going to do one additional thing, and I'm going to add a little bit of a peak, or a point rather, coming out here, maybe a couple little orbs darkened in there, just something a little to end it with. And here I'll add just that subtle tip as well. And then I'm going to ink in this end here. Or, I'm sorry, not the end, this centerpiece. I think I'm going to add a little band here as well. I thought I was going to skip that, but I think I will add it just to help this end not be so bland. Well, we're doing Dragonaire, so we're going to do Dragonaire again. This time I'm going to draw it either behind or off to one side. Let's see here. I think I'm going to draw it this way. Now, this is the other way to draw Dragonaire. Instead of drawing our centerpiece first and working outward, we're going to draw the base shape here. Draws behind. Comes out over there. And now we're going to draw this outer shape. Again, goes around behind. We'll bring that together. Now what we're going to do, we're going to draw inward instead of outward as we did here. We're going to draw our little fescue type shapes inward. Same basic idea to make this version of Dragonaire. That one disappears off behind. This one I get to make wherever I'd like. And we'll do the same thing coming from the other side, leaving a little bit of a gap in between. So we don't want to get these 2 points too close together. So we have that one there. I bet you there was one up here maybe, hiding around in there. And you know what? Even if there wasn't, who's going to tell you otherwise? All right. Now that we have that skeletal framework, we're going to do something very similar to what we did before. We're going to start here at the tip and come to the top or the outside. And then we go from the inside here out to the top. And so it's the same process as before, but it creates a slightly different effect because of how we're doing it. So this line, that one disappeared. This one would come from the inside and go out. And so we're just creating this process all the way down. And now when we get to the end, we're just going to do like this and connect it there, much like we did up here. So here we're coming over from under to out, from under to out inside of there. This one's going to wrap around there, just like that. We just fill in whatever we can see. Like that. And now we want to create some little lines inside here. So instead of inking this, we're going to use little bits of a curve to give a shape that this is a leaf that has curled up, or a shape that is curled up. It may not be a leaf, of course, but so we're going to just draw some little curved lines. that give that impression that these outer pieces have just curled up toward the center, kind of wrapped around themselves. Okay, so we come down here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my line so I know where it's going, and then I'll draw my incomplete lines up from here, just otherwise I wouldn't have known exactly how to curve those. So that just helps a little bit. And we just keep that general curvature going, which again gives form and shape to this pattern. Just like that. And so there we've completed that shape, and we'll add some dimensioning and other cool things with our shading process. So let's see, there's another way. Both of these examples of Dragonaire show us a two-sided shape. One goes inward, one goes outward, but they're both two-sided. What if we used a single side? How would that look? Well, we might be able to draw just a single line. Let's see, I'm going to draw one that maybe starts... let's see, how can we do this? I'm trying to think of a way that might be interesting as we look at it. Let's just do one that kind of comes around like this, goes underneath or behind, and stops there. And I'll add just a little fescue type end to it there. But now what I'm going to do is draw my little shapes that we've been using for our Dragonaire. We'll space them similarly that we have been. And of course there'd be one probably about there and maybe one about there. So we'll just draw that, and then I'm going to draw this little shape here. Alright, so now with one side we make the same thing that we did before, but we're just stopping after a single side. And we're going to add some different kinds of embellishment to this one. Just comes down to the end there. Whoop, got a little thick there. That's all right. Let's ink that in then. We'll make that the end of it there. This one's got the tip up there. Now what I'm going to do to change this one up a little bit, I'm going to add a second curved line that follows that first one, just to accentuate those individual pieces, kind of give them their own unique character. But now I want to draw something on the outside. So I'm going to do something. I said I was going to only do one tangle, but I'm going to do a second tangle here. I'm going to add some flux shapes just along the outside edge here. It's nothing difficult, but it just adds a little bit of interest, some variety to our pattern. This would go up, so I'm going to bring up here, and then we would see this perhaps. Just following a very simple repetition here. And then if we'd like, we can even embellish that a little further with some orbs, just sort of filling along this edge wherever we think there might be need for some additional shapes. And if you think, well, I don't need any additional shapes, Dave, I'm done when I put the flux there. That's okay. Do you? You draw it the way you want to draw it, and that's part of the wonder of pattern drawing and Zentangle in particular is that there's some guidelines and some ideas, but there's no rules that you have to feel guilty about. No need to go to confession and talk about how you didn't fulfill the proper Zentangle method. No such thing in this artistic world. There's only fun and creativity. And we can do one more, I think, over on this side. One of these individual ones. We'll just kind of frame it a little differently here. We'll put it up. I'm just going to stop right about there. I'll go ahead and ink this one just like I did the other one since I made that little mistake. We'll turn it into a no mistake. We'll turn it into an intentional difference there. And now we can do the same thing with our flux shapes. Just gives a little symmetry. And symmetry is not always necessary. I know it's a common thing in Zentangle and other sorts of pattern drawing, but it really isn't essential. It's just that it often makes it more pleasing for a human being to look at because the human brain is wired to look for symmetry and to acknowledge it. And so sometimes that just helps the drawing have more appeal to those who will look at it. But it is certainly not required. So here we'll pile in our little orbs again. And that really is the essence of this particular set of patterns. So I think I'm going to go ahead and move on to the shading today. So I'll get my my pencil, and let's start doing some shading. So with these, like in all Zentangle drawings, we tend to focus on the overlap, the part where one shape overlaps another. So that means everywhere these little shell pieces or segment pieces are overlapping one another or going underneath another, then that's where I want to add a little bit of that graphite so I can create a shadow there. And it will help enhance that effect of over and under. Now I might also want to enhance this curved effect. So that means I'm going to put a little graphite along the inner and the outer edges, just to help those edges seem to recede away from me a little bit, away from the viewer, and it will help give a greater impression of that roundness in the sense of form. I know I repeat a lot of these kinds of things in each of my videos, so I apologize if you're a regular viewer and you find that is annoying to listen to me say the same things over and over again. I do understand that. I've thought very carefully about whether I need to do that, but I never know if there's going to be new folks watching the channel. I hope there are. I hope every time I put a video out there that more people will tune in and see what's going on. But for those new people, I point out these, what might seem to the rest of you as redundant details, but if they're a first-time viewer, of course, it would be the first time they're hearing me talk about it. So hopefully it's something that's not completely unbearable to you as you tag along on this artistic journey each time. All right, so we've added some graphite to that particular piece. So let's go ahead and use our tortillon and come up with some shading here, or some blending. So I'm going to just gently blend these inner and outer lines, just a little. We don't need anything dramatic. We just want to help enhance that sense of form. And you notice I avoided the black. That's another thing that I commonly will say. Adding the graphite to the black not only is unnecessary, but it can actually make those black areas kind of shiny, since the graphite has that tendency, and it can really work against you sometimes when you're trying to enhance your drawing. So just a reminder there. Now let's do the little shadow down in where they overlap. And you see already, if you compare one side to the other, I think that it's much more convincing and gives it some real form and shape there, which I really like. That's one of the fun parts of any drawing to me, is making it look real, or at least dimensional. There may not really be a thing like this out in the world that it can look like, but we start to see form and shape and light and shadow. And that's really when a drawing takes on a life of its own. No matter what kind of drawing it is. So there. I think that works pretty well. We can even add some white highlights with chalk here after we shade everything else, and we'll see how that looks. Now, for these other ones, or this other one behind it, I think I want to add some shadows along the edges here, of course, because it's curled up over that. But we probably want to add some graphite to that whole piece, but we can do that by blending, so we don't need to add a ton of graphite here. Beyond that, I'm going to also do the overlap area. And I'll probably end up doing a little bit on the outer and inner edges just to enhance that roundness like we did on the other shape. I think on these I'm going to do of course, the overlap like we've already done. If I just do this little indentation here, this little area, this groove, where that shape and the flux shapes touch, and if I blend it outward just right, we shouldn't need to individually shade each of our flux shapes. They're going to pick up some of that graphite that I'm adding to this groove, and I think that's going to give us what we want. I might even add just a little bit from my tortillon to this outer edge just to give a sense of roundness to that as well. I think that works out just fine. What about adding a shadow to this whole piece, or these pieces? Now here's where I might say let's use a darker pencil. So I'm going to use my General's Layout pencil, extra black, number 555, common one here in Zentangle. And I'm going to go around the edges of my top shape, nice and black there. Just everywhere that this thing overlaps, number one. But number two, I'm also going to do it right onto the background as well. And just have an idea of a shadow across this entire piece, even across the background. And I'll do it on both sides just because I'm not worried about light source. But if you want to think of it, think of the light coming directly down from the top and not from either side. That would produce this type of shadow effect. You can bring that shadow out a little more if you want to make it seem like it's a little further up off the bottom. The closer it is, of course, the smaller that shadow would be. And now if we want to, we can also add a light shadow to these other shapes as well. Well, there we go. A simple drawing, off the cuff, no planning, no composition, and no worries. We just had fun drawing and creating. So I think I'll call that the end for today. So I'll add my chop. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you had fun as we thought about those moments of returning to the simple Zentangle method and enjoying the drawing without the stress of any additional details. And I look forward to seeing all of you back here real soon in the Tangles and Tunes channel. Until then, take care. Bye-bye now.